Hello there guys, it's Stephen here back with another video, and because it's the international break I wanted to basically go through a few talking points, and one of them that I've seen a lot of questions asking is about Jadon Sancho, the wonder kid who has just left Manchester City, and a lot of people asking whether he was right to move. Does he have a point about his future at Manchester City? Is the pathway blocked? Is he being an egotistical little shit? Is he getting ahead of himself? I don't think really any of us actually know the answer, if we're being totally honest. I think it's probably somewhere in the middle. But as ever though, before I get onto this video, do notice that I am sponsored by OneFootball. They're sponsoring me through September as well, and that's because all you were really kind and downloaded the link in the description. Go and do that now, which means I get to keep making videos and they keep supporting me, which is genuinely life-changingly positive. So thank you for all supporting. Go check the app in the description below. But let's get on to Sancho. I'm going to start with a caveat here that I don't think Sancho handled this well at all. Absolutely abysmally. Awful, in fact. The whole going on strike thing. I know Kicker come out and said that he never went on strike, he cancelled his contract, but I don't think that's true at all. I think that's some press kind of public relations stuff from the German media to not paint Sancho in a bad light. For what I can gather, he didn't turn up for training, he didn't answer his phone, in general acted like a little child. It's not good. I do not like that behaviour from anyone, never mind a 17-year-old. But what would turn around and say that? If we all heard that Sanchez had done that and got a move to Manchester City, none of us would have really complained and just said, well, he's done what he did to his future and we don't really care. Football fans are fickle. I am fickle. I've done it before. And we don't like it when someone does it to us. But when someone does it to that benefits us, we don't really kind of bat an eyelid. We just kind of think, that's fair enough. But it doesn't mean he's right. It doesn't mean it's a good sign for behaviour. But what point do you say a kid is allowed to be childish? A young lad can do that, and it's not the same as, say, a 30-year-old doing it. Surely it's worse when a 30-year-old does it, when a 70-year-old could just be poorly advised. After all that, it's hard to justify those actions. It isn't. No player should ever resort to that, but I guess time will tell whether he's vindicated. But look at the reasons why he actually did that. And a lot of it came from, allegedly, fearing that his pathway would be potentially blocked. Now, whether you think that's fair or not, I don't really know. I don't really care either, personally. None of us actually, our opinions don't really matter, let's be honest. But we look at the stats there, I guess, is a good way to look into it. In general, you look at someone like Kelechi Iheanacho, a man that obviously has a clinical record in the Premier League. Now, he actually played something like 200 less minutes in the Premier League last season than he did the season before. I think he played barely 900 minutes total last year, which is about 10 games of football spread across several competitions and formats. When you compare that to the fact that he played over 1,200 minutes under Pellegrini, his game time went down a lot. And now this is a man who's proven he can score goals. And then when you look at someone like Pablo Maffeo, arguably one of our brightest prospects, a man many thought would be a shoo-in to get a right-back spot this season, well, he didn't. He went out on loan again. He only got 3 appearances last season, barely any minutes at all. That was 2 Champions League dead rubber games, Celtic and Bucharest, which didn't really mean anything. And then obviously a man of the match performance in the League Cup against Manchester United. And even then, he wasn't really used very often. I mean, you got the reasons for it, but he wasn't used often. And he went on loan to Girona, did very well, got promotion, and then was shifted out on loan again. Even someone like Alex Garcia, where you think he was used a lot, well, he only really got about 4 games worth of football, 368 minutes, I think it was. It isn't much, if we're being totally honest. Tosin Adarabioyo got 2 appearances and barely got 120 minutes of football all season. He's one of our brightest prospects. So in general, and then also Brahim as well last season got a solitary substitute appearance, and Angelino got the odd bit of game time, but hardly anything in general. And when you look at the previous season, someone like Pellegrini did frustrating things like leaving a young academy lad like Brandon Barker on the bench for like 10 games in a row, not even throwing them for 5 minutes. And then we have situations where we're 3-0 up at home to West Brom and Scott Sinclair is not played a game for months, and he's brought on when Ambrose was on the bench on fire for the EDS, and he thinks, I'll give Scott Sinclair 10 minutes. Logical decisions like that do not make any sense, and they do not send out a good message. In general, I thought Pellegrini was absolutely awful at using academy prospects. In my personal opinion, he never struck while the iron was hot. And also, Guardiola, well, I kind of feel him for a little bit. I do understand his reticence to use them, because I think in general, the squad was a mess last season. And I think in general, at the start of the year, if you look at the average minutes given to the young players, it was good initially, but then it dropped off a cliff when our form went downhill. It was actually quite encouraging. At one point, I worked out the stats around the end of November, and it was like 3 times as many minutes given out. But then, as I said, our form dropped off a cliff, and then only the senior players were used, which was frustrating. But it is just one of those things, and that's how it is. I do hope Guardiola intends to use young players. If you look at what he did with Foden in pre-season, Brahim getting game time, and then obviously all the other young lads involved in general, like Adebayo and so on, and obviously Dimico Dehaney got involved, Aaron Moric in pre-season. But it's hard these days for young players to actually get a go in the first team. You do look at the Premier League, and it's become this culture where teams can just spend so much money to replace a gap in their squad. Instead of promoting a young lad, they will just spend 30 million because everyone can do that now. We've created a culture where these young players, they're the paupers, and they're only used as a last resort. And even then, it's too easy just to not use them because they probably could just go sign with someone for loads of money. And I think it's something that's going to start to bite big clubs on the arse a little bit. I think you see the likes of Chelsea and Manchester City have both kind of developed this hoarding and then loaning situation where they send these players off for ages. And it gets to the point where at some point, young players are going to think, well, maybe I should be playing football somewhere and in control of my own future. Now, not to say that there isn't positives for this loan system. You could turn around, and I think this is a very logical argument and very fair, and say that, well, maybe being 17, 18, getting trained with the likes of Guardiola or Chelsea, someone like Conte or whatever, one of the best managers in the world, two of the best managers in the world there, being around those world-class players and then being guaranteed a great loan pathway to someone like Vitesse in Chelsea's case, or Girona or NAC in Manchester City's case. Maybe this isn't a bad thing. Maybe it's guaranteed football somewhere in a secure environment. You could turn around and say that. You could easily make an argument for that, but then some people would rather just be out in the world and be making their own pathway. When you look at Sancho's case, well, I guess he maybe thought he was good enough now, which... whether you agree or not, one thing that's for certain is Jadon Sancho is one of the most talented young footballers in the world of his age group. You don't win the European Under-17 Championship golden player. You don't take your English team to the final with the most goals and assists without being a little bit special. People said last year he disappeared in the FA Youth Cup final, and people like Hudson-Odoi outshone him. Yes, they probably did, if we're being honest. But then you look at Sancho with the England team, he outshone all them too, all the Chelsea players. So you can look at it in two ways. Maybe another day Sancho would have done a little bit better there. But in general, his theory that maybe he should be playing football, it probably actually hangs up. If you look at the most elite players of all time, they all start their career very early. They all have this driving ambition. They all end up getting game time. The likes of Zidane, Messi, they both made their debut around 17 years old. Even like Aguero, I think, was like 16 or 15. Maradona was 15 for a fact. And then you've got all the big players like Mbappe, Ronaldo. These players all made their debut around 17. In general, elite talents start young and they start quick. And I understand the idea of not wanting to hang around until you're 19, 20 to try and knock on the door of the first team that you're at. I know there's loans, but it's a little bit different. You could turn around and say he's greedy. I don't think he is greedy. I think maybe he's naive. I think he's probably fiercely ambitious. I think in general, the move to Dortmund was probably dictated by the fact that we wouldn't sell him to an English club, which is fine. But the fact that Dortmund are giving him the number 7 shirt, the fact that they've obviously instilled some kind of belief in him, and it's probably deserved given the talent they've got, it shows that maybe he will actually get some first-team football there. Now, I am not defending his behaviour. I'll keep adding that caveat. And maybe he's wrong. Maybe the likes of Foden and Brahim have shown him what could be. And only time is going to tell him this. But in general, I do fear that Manchester City will get a reputation of being the kind of club that ignores young players, that instead just sends them off on loan and doesn't use them, and we have too much money to splash. I don't think that's necessarily fair yet, but over the past 3 or 4 years, you'd make a case and you'd struggle to argue against that. At some point, we have to have tangible proof that these young players will get a chance. If you look at Foden, straight onto into the reserves once again, into the EDS, as soon as Delph was fit. That must be frustrating for him, because all of a sudden, he looks close, but then he's far away. Yes, some of them will get game time this season, because it's a smaller squad last year. We didn't get Sanchez in. We didn't get a few other players in, so we have got potentially gaps open for them. But they have to get game time. It has to be meaningful. Otherwise, if you agree or not, we are going to gain a reputation of being a club that doesn't give chances to younger players. I think City want to use players. I think Guardiola wants to. But at some point, actions do speak louder than the words. We have to start making those actions, because even though I don't agree with how it's happened, I do agree in general that some young players could look at Manchester City and go, well, how am I going to get in the team when you've got Jesus, Aguero, potentially Sanchez at the time, Bernardo Silva, De Bruyne, Raheem Sterling, Leroy Sané? It's very, very difficult. But doesn't mean it's impossible. And maybe some could turn around and say, well, maybe I get to play with these players. Maybe I get to prove how good I actually am. Maybe I can show them that I am better than that. And that's also a very admirable stance to take. And maybe it's true. I don't know. The answer isn't given by me. I understand both sides of the argument entirely, but I want to know what you think in the comments. I'm gutted to lose Jadon Sancho. I know people said he's probably a little bit of a dick. I met him and he seems like a nice, polite lad. Maybe a little bit naive. Maybe someone's convinced him. Some agent's been in his ear telling that if he plays football, maybe he could play for England in the World Cup. It's that close. Maybe he could get there. Maybe he could see his career rocket if he gets regular football somewhere. And I think it was obvious he wasn't going to get regular football at Manchester City this season. Whether he deserves that or not is up for debate. But he obviously wasn't going to become regular in terms of 10, 15 games at least. Well, time will tell on this one, but it's a very contentious one. I don't have the answer. None of us have the answer, and time in general tends to show how this could have gone. I miss him. He'll be a fantastic player for Dortmund. He's an incredible talent, and hopefully in general, City don't get the reputation of not being a club that will use these players because we've got so much special talent there, and hopefully we'll see someone break through soon. Anyway, guys, let me know what you want to see talk about this week. Let me know in the comments. There'll be a match review, match preview even coming up ahead of the Liverpool game and all that kind of stuff. Subscribe if you're new, and if you haven't already, go and check out my Patreon because every donation makes this channel one step closer to being full time, which would be mint, wouldn't it? See you soon, guys.